Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of In the Spotlight. I'm excited tonight because when you talk about daytime soap and, one of the real legends in the business of daytime soaps, you have to start with this guy because if it weren't for him, you probably don't have the Spencer Cassadine feud. He's been in over 1,000 episodes of Days of Our Lives. He was on Santa Barbara for many years. He has a podcast out that we're going to discuss, The Lost Treasures. This guy has done it all. He also has a cookbook that he's going to explain to us, and it's going to be very exciting. It's my pleasure to introduce to you a legend in the world of soaps, Mr. Thaao Penghlis. And Thaao, I want to thank you for coming on today. It's a real honor for me.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. With pleasure.
So Thaao, you grew up in Sydney, Australia, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Yeah. So, just talk about that because everybody I've ever talked to just says what a beautiful country Australia is.
Yes, even though I escaped from it at a young age, part of it is, in our youth, we're always looking for people to advise us or to give us some perspective of what we don't know, some kind of mentoring. And I wasn't finding it with my relatives. And so I always looked upon America as a place of many dreams and wonderful films, and I liked its people that I had met because I was an immigration official in my youth. And but the landscape of Australia is extraordinary. It's an ancient, prehistoric cliff face that you see in Sydney. So that really makes up for such landscape, and where the architecture, it's not as diverse as it is in Los Angeles, but we have, like here, we have wonderful hills and cliff faces and a diversity of people. Not so much when I left, but now, of course, it's like America. We're a big melting pot trying to get to understand each other.
Right. And you and your family, I think when you were still a kid, would eventually move to Greece, correct?
No, they moved from Greece
right
in the 30s.
Oh, okay.
And so they, we had the assisted passage in Australia. And so they went for the labor force from the Southern European countries. And they migrated, the Greeks and the Southern Europeans, mainly either to the US, to Canada, and to Australia. And so it was difficult because in those days, it was a very Anglo-Saxon country, not understanding other cultures very well in those days. But the cooking was kind of foreign to them. The smells were foreign to them. And so they had to make their adjustments as much as we had. And so I grew up, first language I spoke was Greek because my mother didn't speak English. Yeah. My father had a hard time. The work he was forced to do. But, it's part of, when you look back on it, it's part of what makes you, as diverse, and why I've had a career where I have survived, because I think I came from a very mixed and very convoluted background that I was able to sort of siphon through the characters I play.
Right. And interestingly enough, Thaao, I know you've had a career in acting that's been like 50 years now, but the one thing that I think a lot of people may not realize is you really wanted to be a archaeologist, correct? Like that was your dream before acting, correct?
Yes. Yeah. I used to brag when I was 8 because my father, when the fathers got together, they played cards and had their cigarettes and their drinks. They always kind of try to brag out who the first generation of the family was going to exceed the other. So it was a real competition. So I remember my father always throwing it out to the relatives. So what are you going to do when you grow up? And I'd say archaeology. And they were like, oh my, it wasn't a doctor, it wasn't a lawyer, it wasn't those classic, my son's the doctor and my son's the lawyer. It was just something I loved the idea since I went to a museum when I was 12, and they had a sarcophagus there with a lost pharaoh, and it was partitioned off. And when everybody had gone, I climbed over the partition and opened the coffin because I needed to touch the mummy because it still had its nails, it still had its hair. So for me, that kind of made me excited to think the possibility that you could unearth something that ancient and make it part of your history. And so, that's why I love going to museums. It's about learning about other cultures, which gave you a better understanding of who you were.
Yeah, and I mean the thing of it is too, and we're going to get into it a little more and a little later in this interview, but you've never lost that dream of doing it. And even though you've acted and done so many other things, you've always had this in the back of your mind. It's always been in your heart. And if I had to guess, this is just my opinion, and you tell me if I'm wrong, it's still your greatest passion. And as much as you love acting, I think you love this a little bit more.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think it's much more interesting going into the unknown and deciphering it on your own terms, in a way. There's something about unearthing an ancient treasure that hasn't been touched by anyone before. And so when you go to museums and you see how, if you go to the Italian, the Chinese, you go to the Egyptian, you go to this basically the Southern European, you see that their culture was enough. And so for me, it was kind of strange to go to the Louvre in Paris and see every culture that was there and was being presented to its audience. But the only thing was, it didn't belong to them. A lot of it was stolen in the 19th century. And so I always had a problem with that. And part of it being in Britain, how much they stole in the 19th century, as well as the Germans. So, but still, it is a place to visit. And, there's nothing better to me is going into a museum and seeing things for the first time. And, we have the world has a phenomenal history, and we don't even know what's going on, let alone in our own backyards. We are more consumed with what our country is about, and rather than finding out about other cultures and how they influence the world that we live in today.
And one of the things about being an actor too, Thaao, is you've gotten to, I'm sure, travel around the world. So I'm sure you've seen museums in different countries, and that's got to be a lot of fun when you could go to the different countries and see different museums. And like it's like nothing else. You're always getting to see new and exciting things. So it's got to be something that it doesn't get old for you. Like no matter how many times you go to a museum, you still get that like excitement when you're there.
Yeah, because maybe it's something you missed the time before. I went to the German museum in Berlin, and I went to this museum, and just in one room, there was what was presented was the bust of Nefertiti. And she was, a famous queen in the 14th century BC. And to see this bust, it was so beautiful. And I went to take a photograph of it. And the guard, who was a woman, said to me, no, you can't take photographs here. I said, why not? She says, go in the other room and take it at a distance, but you can't do close-ups here. And I said, but why? So we had this argument. I said, it's not even yours, you stole it. And she got so upset, she left the room, and I went click. The next day, the hypocrisy of it all, there was Beyonce and her husband standing in front of that statue, that bust, taking photographs.
Wow.
So, really showed the more important you are, the more things you get away with, or the more things, especially on a world basis, because it makes news. It was on the front page. So, it's not only did they steal things, it's full of hypocrisy.
Yeah, I can imagine. So let me ask you, Thaao. I know, like again, acting was kind of I wouldn't say late in the game, but a little late in your career. But did you like have an actor or actress that you really idolized as a young kid, or a show that you watched or film, something that got your interest into it, that intrigued you?
Well, being a male actor, I was more intrigued with the male actors, even though actresses like Gene Simmons and Streisand and Meryl Streep, I mean, they certainly do contribute to my interest in the way you interpret life. But Marlon Brando was certainly one of them. I think the greatest influence for me, though, was Peter O'Toole.
Oh,
Once I saw Lawrence of Arabia and saw what he could do with the line, and then be able to pitch it with that kind of voice. I mean, it was just a wonderful, complete kind of actor for me. He sang his role, he danced his role. He was so remarkable. You can't copy those things, but at the same time, what it does is, if people who inspire you, makes you then look for your own being and what is in there that will also come out as unique. Olivier was the other one, and I have a big portrait of O'Toole in my house, and it was given to me when I was at Warner Brothers. And I went, while we were shooting Days of Our Lives, I heard that Peter O'Toole was on the Tonight Show down the hall. So I brought the portrait in with me to have him sign it, only to find out that he came on early, left early, and I didn't get him to sign it. So that was one. But I did work with Omar Sharif, and so that kind of gave me some other stories about Peter O'Toole and how they worked together in Lawrence of Arabia.
right. And I think one person that was very impactful in your career and really helped you to be, I don't want to say the actor you are, but definitely played a part in it, was a guy by the name of Milton Katselos. I'm sure I'm saying no name wrong.
Milton Katselos.
Katselos. Yeah.
Yes, he rejected me 2 or 3 times actually,
Wow.
because someone said to me I should be an actor, and I went to a few classes, but I saw him one time, and I said, "Oh, listen," at a dinner, I said, "Listen, I would like to join your class." And he looked at me up and down. And he goes, "No, you're not an actor," and he kind of dismissed me. And then I saw him on Broadway walking down the street to go to the theater, and I ran after him. This is about persistence, and I don't usually do that. I'm not confrontive that way. Well,
Yeah.
maybe some people would think otherwise, but no. And so I said to him, "What is it about me that you can't go beyond? What is it?" He says, "Because I think you're a dilettante, and I don't think that you have the actor in you." I said, "So why don't you let me have a chance and observe your class?" And that's what happened. He finally said, "Okay, come in the class. You don't say anything and sit there for 3 months." I mean, I did speak out sometimes, but he was the tremendous influence, and I ended up becoming his assistant. So, the thing is, if you know what it is you want and you go after it, you find a way of getting through, because unless you go on the other side of the obstacle, you're not going to know what was there. And so I'm still doing it. I mean, we all do in this business. You have a script, you want to get it somewhere, you want to meet somebody. It's not always, of course, come in. Doesn't matter how many years I've been in the business. There's always someone who's going to say, not now.
Yeah. And Thaao, it almost sounds like to me, although Milton rejected you a couple of times and then he told you could sit in the class but don't say anything, I almost feel like, though, at the same time, he was challenging you to see if you were willing to make these sacrifices to make it. So it was almost like maybe he was always going to kind of let you in, but he wanted to see how dedicated and committed you were to doing this. Because, I mean, it just, in a lot of ways, sometimes I think people like Milton, they do that because they want to make sure that people take this, business serious and things like that.
Yes. Yeah, well, that I had to look up the word dilettante because I didn't know what it meant when he said it to me. I was 22, I think. I thought, what does that mean? And so when I looked it up, I kind of felt insulted because he thought I dabbled in life. And I was quite the serious. Whereas the head writer on Days of Our Lives Now thought I was too deep. Sometimes he had a hard time writing for me because you were too deep. And yet I worked so hard all those years to become a deeper person and understanding the depth of a situation, and then in some way express it either in my writing or my acting. But not everybody's going to be on the same plane. When somebody like he saw me and decided unconsciously maybe to challenge me and see what I would do with it, with what he said, and how I kept fighting it, and in the end becoming his assistant. And he was the assistant to Elia Kazan, who did the Brando films. He was one of America's great directors. And so Milton was an assistant, became a director himself, nominated for a number of Tony Awards, and did some wonderful movies. But to have worked with him was to have had patience with someone who wouldn't allow you in class to say something that would surpass his thinking or his teaching. He would knock you down quickly because it would mean that somebody has usurped the class and dominated him, and he would never allow that. And I remember one time after I finished a scene, and I was sitting at the edge of the stage where we sat, and we would say what we worked for, and then he would critique it. He said to me in Greek, "Xeris posa agapo," which means, "You know how much I love you." So he said it in Greek so the rest of the class wouldn't hear it. I said, "Yes," but I said back to him in Greek, "It's in the way you love." So that kind of threw him a bit. But it was those types of things, because in the end, when he left us so young, I asked him what was his biggest disappointment, because, that's one of the things you get to when you get older. You start to reflect back. It's like people who have dementia, they're in the past. And so we as adults and professionals who have stayed in the business and survived it all these years, you like to talk to people who are on the same level in the way they've lived. Good food, ethical life. He said to me, I said, "What was your biggest disappointment?" And he said to me, "People." So I thought that at the end, the thing that resonated the most with him was how people, and with all that he did for them, they were not knocking on the door when he may have needed them. Didn't show their love like he had shown their love. And so, in the end, how many people are satisfied or happy making their transition? And I think so I stayed around with people who were of great influence, who knew more than I did. And I think in many ways it paid off.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think this too, Thaao, most actors, the majority of them, always do stage as well. And you did stage, and I think your first stage film was called Jockeys. Talk about that a little bit, because I always say this, Thaao, that acting, is very hard to do, but you're always recording everything. It's not live. But when you're on the stage, you're doing that, several nights, and you've got to do it live. And really, there's no margin for error. It's got to almost be perfect. And it's amazing to me how yourself and so many others just do it, and it looks so effortlessly.
Well, inside you're trembling. No, I've had a few experiences in the theater. I mean, I started with off Broadway, when there was a stove, one of those old-fashioned stoves, and that was the only thing on the set, and the gray walls, and 10 people in the audience, and you're doing a new play. And but when I did Jockeys, it had a life of its own. One day in class, Milton said to me and two other actors, a female actress called Simone Griffith and Chick Venera, and the three of us, he came together. He says, "I have an idea. I want you to be a jockey," to the guy who was shorter. He said to the girl, "I want you to be a ballerina." And he looked at me and he says, "And I want you to play Balanchine. I want to get an idea what it was like with these three elements coming together on the stage in an abstract stage." And Balanchine, was one of the great choreographers ever, and Russian. But when he came in, he had a kind of dignified, had a cane. So I got a cane, and we had to develop that, improvise that. Then we would improvise and have 20 minutes of a scene. And then he would bring the class in and have the class watch it and critique it. So out of that came and developed this bigger play. Sidney Poitier's daughter was studying with us at the time, and she had one of the roles as well. And then he called some people that he knew in New York, called the Joffrey Ballet, the head of the Joffrey, called Jules Stein, the composer producer, and Joseph Kipnis. And they came out to watch it. They liked it so much they wanted to take it to New York, to Broadway. And so out of that, and then we had the Mark Taper Forum in Los Angeles. They came and saw it. United Artists came. They want to make a movie of it. So we went through all of this for a whole year. We weren't allowed to do any other work. So we had to sell things. Like I sold some furnishings, some artwork that I had, so I could survive if we were willing to be artists from the beginning. So to start something from the beginning and see it take a life and go to New York, that was quite an experience, because that gave me my breakthrough, that play. Because from there, the movie Slow Dancing in the Big City, by the director who did Rocky, who won an Oscar for it, saw me in the play and then cast me into the movie. And then I did another, and then another, and then I got a play at the Geffen. And then I did that with Victor Buono. And I remember on opening night, I was so nervous because the actor I was working with, we were playing monks from the 14th century in Prague, took his teeth out before coming on stage.
Wow.
So when he started to speak, I couldn't understand him.
Yeah.
Everything was and I got so nervous I actually peed myself. That is the only time, because when you come out in the theater, it's different when you come out and you see cameras and the crew, and so you can, forget about that fourth wall. But on the stage, when you come out and you see all those people, and you can't make a mistake because they pick it up like that. So when you've got your audience by the way they're responding, if they're laughing or if they're intrigued with what you're doing. Otherwise, it's one of the most difficult. I think it's the most difficult art form of them all.
But it has to be such a rush for you after each performance, and you see the crowd standing and they're in awe of the stuff that you and your coworkers are doing and things like that. It's just got to be like a type of feeling that you really can't describe.
It's kind of a euphoria. It's a real high, especially if it goes well, especially if the audience gives you a standing ovation with huge applause. I mean, it's, for 15 minutes, you have this. And then you go home and you think about how wonderful it was and go over in your mind. And then you can't duplicate it because every night's a different audience, so you get a different vibration.
Yeah.
But the thing I always was fearful of, I remember the dialogue. That was my biggest fear. And I remember, doing days all these years, that's a memory muscle that I had to develop, because that bar none has to be the next hardest job to do, because it is so fast now.
And Thaao, you've been on so many iconic soaps, and we'll start with General Hospital, because in a lot of ways, like I said, your character, Victor Cassadine, that really set the tone for the Cassadine-Spencer feud that went on, that's still going on all these years. But amazingly enough, like I know around 96, they took a former Days of Our Lives actor, a tremendous, actor in, God, his name escapes me. It'll come to me in a second. But he became a, what was his name? It was Cassadine. What was the first name? It'll come to me.
You mean John?
Yeah, John. Yep. And,
yeah.
They tried having him, and he did a great job. Don't get me wrong. But I always felt like Victor Cassadine really was the greatest Cassadine villain. And I know Helena has kind of taken on that role for several decades now. But just talk about how the role of General Hospital landed and what it was like to play Victor Cassadine. By the way, Stefan Cassadine. I knew I would get it eventually, but yeah.
Well, the actor who played the eldest brother, his name was John Colicos.
Right.
And Andre Lamzat, I think that's how I pronounced it, he played the second brother. When I went into test for it, they called me in. The casting director liked me. He says, we're going to test you. And then they tested, I think, 5 other actors. And the comments back about me was, well, he's got this English accent, and, this is America, and they don't, it's daytime, and people who want to watch their own. And so I came out of the situation of having to, walk away and say, okay. But then they realized that the actor they cast, Andre Lanzat, wasn't coming on as a strong enough Cassadine. So they called me back in and they said, you know what, we want you as the third Cassadine. And that's how that's how the seed was planted. Had the most horrible time in the beginnings of it because I couldn't remember that much dialogue. My brain wasn't, that capacity of remembrance was just too difficult. But she was fantastic. The producer, Gloria Monty,
Yeah.
the best. I wish they were like that. She was a tough cookie. She wouldn't take any crap from anybody. And she gave it to, nobody was the star. She would come up and tell them if she was not pleased. And so with me, I was the only one who survived. 30 actors that summer. I was the only actor who survived. The brothers died. They kept me going. And then she called me in the office and then said to me, so what's it like to be the only actor that has survived this whole summer storyline? And I thought at that time, oh, I wonder why. But she saw something, and I think it was that I always had an element of surprise. I always kept a secret with me in some way that they didn't know. And I remember when I was studying lines, she'd come up to me and she'd say, how are you doing today? I would ignore her sometimes. And that caught her because she realized that I had something of the character that she wanted to develop further. And then she said, we want you to come back in a couple of months. But then the head writer of General Hospital left and she went to Days of Our Lives and I went with her.
Yeah, and I mean, it turned out great for you. But that's, like I said, I was really happy. I think you came back around 2006 or 2007 and you reprised that role of Victor. And I thought that was great for the audience because they hadn't seen Victor Cassadine in a very long time. And you just did a remarkable job with that. But when I really think back to it, soaps really, in my opinion, as far as young teenagers in high school and kids in college and stuff, it really took off in the 80s. So you were there right at a time when General Hospital was just becoming bigger than it ever was. I mean, like I said, Anthony Gary had just come onto the scene and he was very popular. And that rivalry really, I think, helped the popularity of not only General Hospital, but of Anthony's character, Luke.
Yeah, he wasn't your normal hero, he was the anti-hero, really.
Yeah.
He wasn't a particularly attractive man, but there was something about him had a persona that was kind of the bad boy persona, but people loved him getting away with things. And so in many ways, how do you keep a character surviving and having the longevity? And that is because there's something about you the audience hasn't discovered yet, and you keep feeding them little by little. And so you always play the game ahead of the game. And so Tony was he was wonderful and wonderful to work with. I really enjoyed my days. Those days were great. And when I came back, it was kind of interesting to come back and after having been in prison, how is this person now? How does he respond to things? And I made him darker in many ways. I made him more diabolical, and because I knew more now. And if you spend time locked up and everything, you've got plans you were never able to fulfill. So depending also on the story and depending also on the writers, because unless you've got the words to say, you can't always make a scene work if it's on the flat side or if it doesn't have much of an imagination. Don't forget, it was 1981 when I did it, and you come back 30 years later, and how do you bring a character back? But he was successful. I was supposed to go back, but Days wouldn't allow me to leave to go and do that character, so I stayed on with Days.
Yeah, and what a run on Days of Our Lives. I mean, like I said in the beginning of the show, I would have to look it up, but I think you did probably 1,400 episodes on Days of Our Lives.
15. I think around 1,500.
Yeah, and I mean that's just unbelievable, and that was what I wanted to ask you too, Thaao. I mean, daytime is so much different than primetime because primetime, say, I'll just use a show like Knots Landing or Falcon Crest Dynasty, whichever one you want to use. They're on once a week. So they're making episodes, but they're making 22 episodes throughout the years. Back then, they probably made 30. But the point I make is daytime actors, there's really no break. I mean, I know at times they'll give the character a little of a break and the actor, but really, you are working year round all the time. And it really is like a grind sometimes. So just talk about that a little bit.
Well, you have to find an outlet in some way when you are portraying a character day in, day out, and you feel that sometimes the writing, because it's like anything, they can't always give you things that are, because you have no crescendo sometimes for months. You're just going along flat. What I did as an outlet was I took the archaeology that we talked about in the beginning, and then I would give myself a month off if I could get a month, usually 2 weeks. I would go and do shopping in Rome and get my clothes. I had it in my contract that I could go and choose my own clothing. And then I would then go to different places I've never been before and do some archaeological discoveries and meet with, people in museums, going to Troy. And part of my podcast, of course, is about the discovery of Troy and the great archaeologist, the father of archaeology, Ulrich Schliemann. There's something about sitting over 9 cities built over each other from 2400 BC, and you sit there and you look out and you realize that right in front of you is where the war took place, where the wooden horse came in and tricked the Trojans into letting the Greeks come in. There's just something about being part of that environment and walking in the footsteps of the ancients. That's what I love about it, because to me, you can't replace those thoughts that come through your head that inspires you, so that when you come back into your job that pays for all of this, you have all that history and that excitement, and then you can put that through your character.
Right. And speaking of characters, I mean, God, Tony was as popular of a character as anyone ever was. And what I liked about him, too, is he could do a lot of things that were, very, I don't want to say devious, but they were bad, and he did a lot of things that, a villain does at times, but he also had some good qualities about him. And that's what I really loved about what you brought out in that character, because you can make the audience hate that character sometimes, but they could also love him as well. So he wasn't really always, what I would call a villain all the time. He was kind of a little in between.
Yeah, he was, I did that purposely. Yeah. Because what you do is they give you a page, and then you as an actor, your responsibility is to take that dialogue off that page and try to go beyond what the writers imagined. That's part of survival, and that's part of longevity. And I remember how I thought in some scenes, especially when I played 2 characters, what differentiated one from the other. So I decided with Tony, I would dress him up well. That would get people's attention, because let's face it, people love seeing people well dressed. I mean, when we watch the Oscars and watch award shows, one of the things people take delight in is what were they wearing? Yeah. And so for me, that's why I took responsibility to buy my own clothes. And I would, depending on the mood of the character, I would dress accordingly. Also dress accordingly to what setting I was in, because I didn't want a clash of colors. You don't wear brown, for instance, when the walls are wooden. You have to find contrast. And so therefore it's the same as the character. You've got to bring in the contrast, the diabolical side of this character you're playing. And so the shoes were one thing, because it created the walk. The suit gave me the attitude, or whatever else I was wearing. And I would walk in with a secret all the time, something nobody knew, and I would play on that thought. And then also when we did one rehearsal, and then the other actor who was trying to either arrest me or do something that was, to hurt me in some way, I always saved the take. I never gave the other actor everything I was going to do that I did in rehearsals. So when it came, I always liked the element of surprise.
Yeah, and I mean, it really was like loved that character. And one of the things I wanted to ask you too, Thaao, is Days of Our Lives is still on the air. You know, I'm a little disappointed it got moved to Peacock. You know, once I saw NBC do that, you always worry that eventually it's going to get canceled. But so many soaps got canceled over the years. You know, it to me, you know, it was a disgrace when they got rid of Another World and they got rid of One Life to Live and All My Children and stuff like that. And I just really think that was a terrible job by a lot of the networks to get rid of such beloved shows that fans really loved. And to me, the fact that we only have like 4 soap operas now, it's just really mind-boggling to me, because I really believe that from 12 o'clock till 4 o'clock, the best thing that ABC, NBC, and CBS had were those daytime soaps.
Well, what it did was it created something for the audience to sort of can't wait. You know, when we were kids, you'd go and see serials before the movie came on, and we were always excited because they always would finish it off just at that moment. And you're going, wow, what's going to happen tomorrow? So it kept the audience going and going and going. And I remember there was an actor in New York where they were taping. No, it was live. And I remember he was called in and said that he was going to be killed off. And he was very upset. And this was quite a well-known actor. And what he ended up doing was on the Friday, they're supposed to shoot him dead. And he was collapsed, and that would have been the end of him. But what the actor did was when they shot him at that last moment live, he turned around and said, missed. So it meant that he had to come back on the Monday. He out-tricked them, you know. So I always loved that story about actors being ahead of in the game and giving. So, you know, that serials, that's what gave him. That's why in South America, you know, all those mini series they do down there and all those novellas, you know, people love those. They're highly dramatic. There's more drama in that and them than it is in your own life. Or, you know, or there's some guy or girl that you can fall in love with and can't wait to see to the next day. You know, it's all those things, because when you go out to the public, especially at the height of those soaps, people would be running through the airport screaming, and you know. So, but it's been a trip, and I've enjoyed it.
And you know what's funny? You just brought it up about being killed off. One thing about soap operas that is been a thing since day one, and it continues, is you never really die. Your character could be killed off, and then 20 years later, you could come back to life. You know, we talked about the Cassadine feud and all that stuff, but Helena Cassadine has been killed a few times. She's still there. You know, I think of a character, Duke Lavery, who they thought was dead on General Hospital, and then 30 some odd years, you find out he's in a prison in Switzerland. So one thing about soap opera characters, they never really die.
Well, that's true. I think I was the first actor in daytime to play 2 characters, because we changed the rules with after union. The other thing was, I think I was the first that kept coming back. I've come back 7 times.
Yeah.
So how do you know, in the beginning when they killed you off, it was a very sad thing. It was infuriating. You know, they call you up and they close the door, and there's the producers and casting, and they're saying, well, sorry, but we've decided we're going to kill the character off. And then you go, what for? You know, this is a popular character. Why would you? Because of ratings. You see, they want a big drama. And so, you know, the fans would be out of the gates screaming they want Tony back, or it was Deidre Hall when she was playing the devil. You know, there's all those things that really enticed the fan. It was a form of seduction. And yeah, it's a smart business. That's why it's, when you think about it, how long it's existed and in life, because we have an audience that doesn't remember anything that happened 5 minutes ago, and you know, they don't even know what history came before them. For me, you know, one of the things that made actors great, the producers, directors great, was because they had a history that they stood upon. They knew who came before them. You know, they appreciated the great talents, and therefore they wanted to be as good or better. And these days, I don't know. I mean, it's just not the same.
You know, I could definitely ask you about Santa Barbara or General Hospital, but when you play one character for 1,500 episodes, I think it's only fitting to ask you about that particular storyline. Was there one storyline that you enjoyed on Days of Our Lives that stands out more than the rest?
I liked it with Andre. I liked Tony because the scenes with I did with Stefano, who played my father. I mean, Joe Moscolo. They were just great scenes, I thought, because you had a powerful father and you had a combative son, and that always brought big drama. And I was never. I'm not a person who's afraid very easily in life, and I've come across a few monsters, and you learn how to handle them. But the thing I loved about Andre was when he started playing the clown, and just there's something where you wear an outfit and it covers you all up. Your face is not the same, your behavior is not the same, so you can get away with anything. So I really enjoyed playing the deeper voice. I enjoyed playing his, I don't know, I gave him a dance, I gave him pirouettes, and I mean, I love upsetting Alison Sweeney. I mean, the way she responded, the way the clown would touch her in certain places, that was almost to the point of where it was at the edge of how far you can touch someone. And that uncomfortableness is what I thrived on. And at the same time, it gave me such pleasure. And even when I had to address in drag, which I'm not particularly comfortable in, but when I played the nurse, I made her as ugly as possible. I didn't want anybody to sort of say, "Oh, he doesn't look good in drag." I thought, no, I'm going to beat them to it. I'm going to play the nurse. I'm going to put these glasses from the 50s on, put a little wig on that made her look like an aunt, and then gave her these shoes that she would then strut in a certain way. And then I had to find a sweater, because my shoulders were too broad. So I had to find a sweater that would cut that down. So all those elements that you put together to make this character come alive were part of the beauty. And I enjoyed the diversity.
And one of the things I think too, Thaao, that a fan really likes, even though it may be a little bittersweet because you hate to see a character you invested so much in and they leave or they get killed off. But I really think that fans enjoy seeing a favorite character of theirs end up on another soap opera. And after Days of Our Lives, you eventually went to Santa Barbara, I think 1992, maybe 91. And you get to kind of see as a fan, okay, he's on this new soap now. What is he going to do as a different character? How is he going to bring it to life? So I always think it's cool when you see somebody you really like on a favorite soap and you see them go to another soap, because it does two things. One, it makes you like, it allows you to see what that favorite character of yours is going to be in this soap opera, but it also introduces you to maybe a soap opera you never watched before.
Well, Santa Barbara shouldn't have happened. I was tricked into it, to be honest with you. It's still infuriating to think of what happened. Yes, Paul, he's gone now, but Paul, the producer, called me in and said, "I would love you to be on our show." And I said, "Well, I've done soaps for too long now. I want to branch out into other things," because I went on to do Mission Impossible.
Yeah.
And he said to me, "I tell you what we're going to do. We're going to take you to Lake Como in Italy. You and Kim Zimmer are going to have this incredible love story." I said, "Oh, really?" He says, "Yes, we're going to fly to Greece and then to Lake Como, and we're going to do this in a big mansion we have, and we're going to do this incredible story." And I said, "Oh." And I thought the idea of going to Italy and Lake Como and doing this would be fabulous. And so I went to my agent. I said, "You know what, let's give it a try. I mean, how long?" So he wanted at least 2 years. And I said, "Okay." And I was just offered a mini series, and I was going to shoot in Spain, but the money was so bad because I did Memories of Midnight. Then the producer liked me, so he upped the salary. But I went to him after doing Santa Barbara. I was there, 3-4 weeks. So I said to him, so when are we going to Lake Como? And he said, oh, I forgot to tell you, it's been canceled.
Oh, oh man.
So I realized what a duplicitous person he was, and I couldn't trust him.
Yeah, that's
Here I was, that I was sucked in, thinking, believing him. And so I wasn't that crazy about him. I thought there was so much ego there. And you could see, even by the way, the last day of Santa Barbara, he took a cigarette out and had the lights turned off in the studio as he was smoking, and he said the goodbyes as if he was the show. And then he put his cigarette out and with his foot and left. And there, the last thing you see is his empty chair, like he was it. So I just, I had a few come. I said to him one day, I said, do you think you can get better lighting on me? And he says to me, how dare you? I have Emmy Award winning lighting directors on my show. And I said, not on my face, you don't. And so he was furious. And he never spoke to me for about 3 weeks. So I just would never forgive him. So Santa Barbara to me is more of a memory than it was an experience, because that always stayed. It was a bitter taste that I got.
Him aside, though, did you enjoy working with the people on the show?
I love Kim Zimmer.
Yeah.
Kim Zimmer is such a fantastic. She doesn't work, I don't think, much anymore. But oh my God, she'd won 5 Emmys. She was phenomenal. I mean, I remember doing a scene with her, and she grabbed me by the balls.
Oh, jeez.
And she says to me, give it to me, and I was shocked. And she had, in many ways, she was testing me. And then she's supposed to slap me. So she slapped me so hard that I saw stars. And the director says to the camera, sorry, didn't get that. Can we try that one more time? So she slaps me on the other side. And then they didn't get that one either. And I said to her, if you slap me like that again, I'm going to punch you.
Yeah.
And that's when she grabbed me by the balls. And she said, try it.
And, she was very good on guiding light as well. I mean, she was just.
Oh, she was wonderful. I loved working with her because she was a challenge. She's a wonderful actress. And I remember one of the highlights was when we had to learn to do the tango.
Yeah.
And we rehearsed that, and that was a delight. So she's one of the people that go down in my books as one of the best.
Right, exactly. So one of the things you've been doing, Thaao, and I think it's really cool, and it's just like I said, an example of how that love for archaeology never left your system is this podcast you have called The Lost Treasures. And talk about that a little bit. There's the big thing with the poems of Homer, which is really cool. So just talk about how that all came about.
I spent 20 years exploring that story, because every time I went to Greece, I would then find another place that he was part of, even his mansion. Went to Troy a number of times, went to his place of burial in Kolonos in Athens, and I went there 3 times and sat by him, by his mortuary temple, and just decided. I thought to myself, God, what an extraordinary man. I went to Germany to look up his background, read 9 books, went through 60,000 documents, and then one day I turned around and I thought, I have to tell this story. What do I do with all this information? And that's how it started. So there are 4 stages in this, because, Homer was in the 8th century BC, and he was part of the illiterate age. So they could only talk their stories and their tales. It wasn't until the 6th century then in BC that became, people were able to learn to read and write. And so it was a very interesting time. I mean, we all thought that those myths of Homer, characters, all those warriors, when you walk that ancient road where they all existed, there's something about you that you become part of it. And when I explored all this stuff, and then one day I thought, well, I'm going to write it. So for 2 years, I wrote the 4 stories. And because in between doing Days of Our Lives. And then one day I went to the agency and we recorded them. They put the special effects that took quite a while. But in all, it went well. Now I'm writing a biblical story. I think that's going to be the next stage. There's certain stories I want to talk about. The stealing of the Elgin marbles, or the Parthenon marbles that are in the British Museum. I want to bring that subject up again because I think as long as we keep talking about it, it won't die. And so, if you want your audience out there to listen, controversy is a good thing.
And one of the things you want to do that was big for you with doing this was to romance your audience, correct? I mean, that's how you want to try to inspire them with the notion of gods, of men. I mean, things like that, correct?
Yes. Well, let's face it, that's why I like cooking. You seduce people. There's nothing better than seducing people with food because it can lead to many things, as we can find out. Yeah, I mean, you've got a dining table, and that's one of the things. If I had moved to another country, I would take that table with me because it had the history of all those people that came and ate over the years in my home, and all the stories that were told. It's got a great memories. In many ways, I wish that I'd gotten all the autographs, but I didn't want to ruin the table. But to have gotten all the autographs of people that had arrived and who enjoyed the evening, because let's face it, then you got stories to tell. Each person. I mean, I had a few celebrities, and the stories they had. It's exciting, and that's what evenings are about. Not ordering instant food and thinking that is a ceremony. I mean, it's a matter of just eating. To me, it's about taking care of the body, and it's a spiritual thing as well. And so I've got friends that when they come for dinner, everybody holds hands and they go into a prayer and they celebrate, and that's why life is about seducing. And I mean, that's what politicians do, don't they, with their lives? They keep seducing people into believing what they're saying is true. I mean,
yeah. And I always look at archaeology as just it's so fun. Like, I mean, it really is. And so many people have a passion for it because, like I said, you could always find new things when you're exploring like that. So, I mean, being able to do this and kind of, tell your story and things like that, it's got to be very rewarding for you.
Well, in Athens, for instance, I would go into what they call the Plaka area, which is where all the restaurants and coffee shops are. And I would walk a little bit further, and there are some cafes there overlooking 5th century BC columns and buildings that still survive to this day. And I would have a cup of coffee, and I just would think about what must have been like. And walking through ruins to me is there's just something about you walk through. In the Acropolis, you can't do it now, but in the Acropolis, which is on the Parthenon, when I went in there, I went in and did a dance. I did a Greek dance. Well, I was doing that until the military security called me out. And because, it's been damaged so much. When you look at the history of the Parthenon, that incredible piece of architecture that so many through history have copied in their face of their buildings, their structure, you realize you could cry when you think of how they collapsed the ceiling of that building, what was in that building, what they stole from that building, what the Turks did during the Ottomans invasion for 350 years, how they allowed Lord Elgin, son of a bitch, to take down those marbles that changed the structure of that building in 2,500 years. It did more damage in 10 years when they took those down because it's perfection. The way it was built, when they describe how it was built, those pieces above those columns were part of the structure that kept it together. And, they dropped, when you see part of the history where they dropped things from there and smashed them on the ground, and you're thinking, oh my God, you know, that's where we came from. That's part of our ancestors. That's our blood. That's so every culture, you know, Indian cultures in America, Indian cultures, Aborigines in Australia, you know, they have their sacred lands, and that's part of their dreams that are taken away from them by people who are ignorant and don't care about how others feel. They're insensitive to other cultures. That's why I think I became an immigration official, because I wanted to understand other cultures, and that then proceeded to expand for me when I went into other countries and discovered their archaeology.
Yeah, and I think it's really cool, Thaao, how you've kept up with it and you've never lost that love for it, even in all these years of acting. You've still kept that with you. But you know, you were talking about food before, and speaking of food, you've got a cookbook that's going to be coming out soon. Did you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, Seducing Celebrities. It's a reissue of a book that I did, and uh, it didn't have, when it first came out, Days of Our Lives promised, when we had Days of Our Lives, their book, that it was going to be published along with it. And they never did. They never, even my publisher, Rick Tower, who published the book, couldn't get in to help us with publicity. So because I was so busy working, I let it go on the side. So I didn't give it a life. And so now the publisher called me and said, I want to put this book out. And so I said, okay, so it's going to be half the price of the previous, because it's black and white inside, and the cover will be the same. But, you know, to me, food has been one of the most incredible. I learned since I was 18, where people who knew better than I did, I would watch them. I mean, when I worked in New York, and I was invited to some people who had chefs and everything, I would go in the kitchen and watch how they cooked. And that's why I mean, look how long it took to get a good cook show on. Now you can't, there's just too many, you know, and people love to see recipes and explore those things, you know. So along with the good thing about the book is, along with the recipes, I think about 75, are stories of people that I entertained and what I cooked for them. Even when I met Jacqueline Kennedy and I did Greek shortbread and tea, and while I sat there with her for an hour when I was 21, that's kind of started it all, you know. I just saw the way people respond to food and especially when it's personal. If it's something you bought at the store, they say, oh, they did a nice job here. But when you've done it, there's something personal about it. Yeah. You know, when your mother cooks, there's something, the heart's in it. You know, so to me, you don't cook without a heart. Otherwise, the food's going to be a convenience.
No, I think it's really cool that you're doing that. And I love the title of it, because, I mean, I don't know a person out there that doesn't love food. So, I mean, you know, and it's really true what you said. Any show you could watch, whether it's The Chew, whatever it might be, I mean, they have all these different recipes. And I mean, a lot of times I have to walk away because you just want to, you know, go eat right after you watch it. But I mean, I think it's cool. I mean, you've done so many things. You've really been diverse in everything you do. What would you say, though, Thaao, if you had to pick one thing, has been the most rewarding thing about your career?
I think that I was able to send my parents, who were very poor when I left, that I was able to send them overseas 6 times, even bring them to America, and gave them journeys they never thought they would have. I think the rewards of that, and seeing, I can't say it gave them longevity, because my mother got cancer and my father had a heart attack after she died. And so, you know, that was a big reward, because in many ways, the identity I left with in Australia was to help my parents have a better life. And I think the rewards of finding a profession that paid me well and gave me so much as a human being, but the rewards of it was that I was able to embellish upon that and give my parents something they didn't dream of.
Well, you know, Thaao, I think that's probably the best answer that anybody could give. I mean, I think that says a lot about you as a person. And it's hard to believe an hour has went by already, but I really do thank you for giving me an hour of your time. And I got to say that for me, it was a real highlight because I've watched your career for many, many years. And I'll tell you what, you are proof that, you know, you're still young. It doesn't matter what the age is. I mean, you still are working and doing things that you've been doing your whole life. And I really do applaud you for not only the career you've had, but like the person you are. Because to me, just getting to know you in this last hour, I like the person so much better than the actor. And I really love the actor too. So
Oh,
thank you for
thank
me.
you, Mike. Thank you.
Really do appreciate
I
it.
really appreciate it. Thank you much for the interview. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Thaao. And folks, there you have it. I mean, you've gotten to watch this gentleman for over 50 years. I mean, he is a credit to daytime soaps. He's a, unbelievable actor. He is so talented, so gifted. But just listening to him in the last hour, you really got to see what kind of person Thaao is. And I mean, to me, he's got his priorities in order and he's very motivated. He's very innovative. He just loves. You could tell this is a guy who enjoys life, and he takes advantage of everything that life has to offer. And he's really one of those remarkable human beings, people that we really strive to be in life. For In the Spotlight, I'm Mike Kenichi saying good night, everyone.